What's going on, everybody? I hope you all are having a wonderful day, a wonderful evening here. We're going to go ahead and get started with mastering mold, the silent killer. So tonight we're going to learn all about mold, whether or not we think mold is going to be affecting us, how we can test to see if mold's affecting us, if it's affecting our environment or our loved ones. And then if it is affecting us, what can we start to do to work on getting mold away from our body, out of our environment, and start to get ourselves on the path to recovery. Because for most people who are dealing with mold, it's been a very long journey trying to get to this point, trying to really uncover what's been going on. They've tried a bunch of different things. The symptoms seem like they're all over the place. People have told them that they're crazy, but you're not crazy. It might be mold. And tonight we're going to talk about whether or not that is you. So let's go ahead and get started. Make sure I can switch my slides here. That would be helpful. There we go. All right. So before we can talk about whether or not mold is affecting us, we've got to just talk about what is mold to begin with. So mold is a fungus. It's a member of the fungus family. Mold is very important from an environmental standpoint, but just let's look at what the National Institute of Environmental Health and Sciences says mold is. Mold is a microscopic organism that plays an important role in the breakdown of plant and animal matter. Outdoor molds can be found in shady, damp areas or places where leaves or other vegetation is decomposing. Indoor molds can grow on virtually any surface as long as moisture, oxygen, and organic materials are present. When molds are disturbed, they release tiny little cells called spores into the surrounding areas. So there's a couple things I want to just break down with that. Number one, outdoor molds found all over the place, normal. Indoor molds, we should not have any indoor molds. Indoor molds can grow on organic material that's within our house. So building materials being a big one. Food, obviously, we've all seen moldy food in the fridge. But for the purposes of today, we're not necessarily talking about that moldy piece of bread that you found in the back of your fridge. We're talking about the mold that's growing on the drywall, behind the drywall, in the shower, in the basement, all over our environment in our house. It's constantly releasing those tiny little spores into the air. The other thing is, it says down there, last sentence, when molds are disturbed. So it's going to be another really important thing we'll talk about all the way at the end when we start talking about what we can do if we do have mold. Don't disturb mold, please, because when you disturb mold, that's when it starts to release those spores. It releases mycotoxins. And if you have mold sickness because of mold growing in your house and you disturb it, you might make yourself way worse. So please don't run out there and try to be a hero and get rid of the mold. Sorry. Checking some comments here. We need to turn the background music off. Let me see if I know how to do that. Uh-oh. Let me try to turn the background music off here. Hang on. Bear with me 1 second. Background music, volume 0. Okay. Does that fix the problem with the background music? Hopefully. Just turned it down to 0. So we should be good. And hopefully everybody can hear me okay now with this mic here. So I'll check back in the comments in a couple minutes. Yes? Okay. Awesome. Sorry about that. I hope you guys were at least able to catch that. Gist of the story is, mold's normal when we find it outside. It's part of the fungi family. Don't disturb it if you find it in your house. So let's look at kind of some other things that are in that same kingdom of fungi. So we've got yeast. We all know yeast, baker's yeast, brewer's yeast. We use this in all sorts of things like breads, things that rise, alcohol, things that are fermented. Yeast is very important from a culinary standpoint. We've got mushrooms. Mushrooms can be very beneficial. Mushrooms can have some crazy psychedelic actions as well. And they can also be very good medicinally. So mushrooms, a lot of people are really familiar with the medicinal effects of mushrooms. And then we've got mold, and mold gets a really bad rap. And that's because of indoor mold and the mycotoxins that mold releases and the effect that that has on our bodies. Really, the only difference between mold and mushrooms is that mushrooms grow a big fruiting body. That's that mushroom that you see. Molds don't grow that. They have spores. Either way, the underground network looks very similar. So with the mold spores, we can see here the mold, we can see we've got this long kind of underground matrix there called the hyphae. We've got the root system that grows into the material. And then what you see when you're actually looking at a mold colony that's formed, what you're looking at are the spores and those sporangioms. And so when you start disturbing that mold, that's when it releases those spores out into the environment. And that's how mold spreads its seed and grows. Mold is very fiercely territorial, which is why when you disturb it, it starts releasing those spores and it's trying to kill anything that's getting in its way of surviving. So, why does it exist? Well, mold is a very important thing ecologically. When it's outside, we often see mold on decomposing branches, leaves, animals, things like that in the environment, because what it's doing is it's decomposing those organic pieces of matter. It's pulling the nutrients out of them, which then just feeds those nutrients back into the soil. All we are, all the animals are, all the trees and plants are, is we've taken the nutrients from the soil, we've assimilated those into our being, and we've grown as a result of that. Once we are no longer living, if we don't have a process with nature that puts that nutrient back into the soil, then we're not going to be able to turn that over, and we're never going to have that continuation of life. And mold is the really, really important thing that does that, which is why when fruit or bread or food starts to go bad, we start to get that mold on there. It starts to shrink down in size, and eventually, if you left it, it would just completely go away because the mold is completely kind of engulfed that and decomposed that. So outdoor mold, very important part of the cycle of life. Indoor mold, we should not have it. Now, people have been dealing with mold sickness ever since we started living indoors. The way that we have our homes built nowadays with that airtight seal that we all have for environmental ecological purposes, trying to keep the hot air out and the cold air in, that sealing up of our homes has really created an environment that has allowed mold to just spread everywhere. So especially in the state of Florida, we talk a lot about how mold is an issue down here, but mold's an issue in all sorts of places up north as well, specifically places with basements. In Florida, we don't have basements, but we have the constant humidity. Well, up north, they don't have as much humidity all the time, but the basements are really, really hard to get mold out of. Even if you have a finished basement, it's very difficult to keep that humidity at a low enough level. Basements are also sealed to be waterproof, and that sealing just locks in moisture inside so it can't escape and breathe. So what does mold require for life? Mold requires oxygen, organic materials, and water and humidity. So what does this look like inside your house? Think about it with food. It's really easy to understand. If I have a piece of meat and I put one piece of meat on the counter and I vacuum seal another piece of meat, which one is going to start to break down or get mold on it first? And we all know this intuitively. The piece of meat that was just left sitting on the counter is going to start to grow mold much faster than the piece that was vacuum sealed. Reason for that is because we've sucked all the oxygen out of there, and that has slowed down that growth of mold. So we've got to have oxygen. We also have to have some sort of organic material. Mold can't grow on concrete. It doesn't grow on aluminum bars. It doesn't grow on tile floors. Mold grows on organic material. Think things like drywall, things like the wooden studs that we have behind our drywall, kitchen cabinets, the particle board that's under sinks. The reason that we always see mold in those type of areas is because that's organic material. Now, the other thing that mold likes is dust. And so when we talk about organic building materials, think about something like our gypsum board or our drywall. That's really finely packed dust, essentially. So mold really likes to grow on surfaces like that because of how dust-like, I suppose, or how easy it is to decompose and get in there and digest that. And then the other thing that we have to have is water and humidity. So mold really struggles to grow at low humidities. It really thrives in high humidities. There's actually 3 different types of mold we're about to talk about, which thrive at different types of humidity levels. But in general, if you can keep your house below 55 degrees or 55% humidity, that's going to be the best. One of the ways that you can know kind of what that humidity level looks like in your house is if you turn the AC unit on and the glass starts to condensate. Think when it's really humid outside, it just rained a bunch, you got the really cold air inside, it is cooling down the glass on the outside of the house and it condensates. That's because the humidity outside is so high. So what we don't want to do is have a ton of humidity in our house. Next thing we're going to look at are the types of mold. So there's 3 main categories. These are not specific types of mold. They're just more of categories here. So we've got xerophilic, mesophilic, and hydrophilic. So for anybody who's got a chemistry or science background, you recognize that philic means water, basically. So xerophilic essentially means 0 water, mesophilic, medium water, hydrophilic, Lots of water. So a xerophilic mold colony is going to grow in about 24 to 48 hours very, very quickly. And it's also going to prefer drier places. So this is not the type of mold that you're going to find under a running sink in an active water leak. This is the type of mold that's just going to grow in a place that's pretty damp and humid, maybe where water leaking has happened in the past. And if you are exposed to mycotoxins that are coming from a xerophilic mold colony, you're the type of person who may actually feel better when it's a little bit more humid out, because this type of mold is the most active with less humidity. So as the summer months down in Florida come, when it gets super humid, if you start feeling better, that may actually be an indicator that the xerophilic type of mold is what's affecting you. We also have mesophilic mold. So this is going to be that moderately damp environment. This is going to grow in about 7 to 10 days, so it takes a little bit longer. Typically, this is going to be an area with dripping water, so not an actual flooded building, but more that just dripping, slow dripping sink, the shower, the bathtub, places like that. A lot of times we get those dripping faucets actually behind walls, which is one of the reasons that it's so difficult to find if you have mold in your house. It's going to be adjacent to water leaks. Typically, these people will feel a little bit better when it's humid outside as well. Then we've got hydrophilic mold. So these are going to be the slowest growing mold colonies. They grow in about 1 to 2 weeks, but they love moisture and they love wet materials. So usually there's going to be an active water leak here. There's going to be a building that was damaged in a hurricane, a storm, someone's basement flooded at home. And these people are going to feel much worse during that time of active water leak or when it's very, very humid outside. So a lot of times people who are talking to you about mold, they may say, oh, well, you should feel worse when it's humid outside. Well, not necessarily. So don't necessarily write off your symptoms because you can't find an active water leak at home because you feel better when it gets humid outside. There still could be mold playing a role. It may just be a different type of mold. Now, mold is not the only thing that causes sickness. It's not just the mold and the mold spores. One of the biggest things is the gases that are released from mold. The most toxic one that we're going to spend the most time talking about tonight are called mycotoxins. Myco meaning mold or fungi, toxin, obviously toxins. So these are toxins released by fungi into the air. Molds are also going to release aldehydes, alcohols, and VOCs. The mycotoxins we can't smell. So you're not going to walk into a building and say, oh, it smells like mold, I need to get out. The buildings that smell musty and you walk in and you say, I know there's mold in here, that's not the mycotoxins you're smelling. It's actually the aldehydes, alcohols, or the VOCs that you're smelling. So it's still off-gassing, but those are not going to be as detrimental to your health as the mycotoxins, which unfortunately you can't tell, you can't smell. So there's no outward warning signs that there's mycotoxin exposure going on within your house. So these are going to be what is released when the mold is under attack. And this is the other reason we say don't go and disturb a mold colony. Don't try to clean it yourself. Let the experts handle that, because as soon as you go in and you start trying to attack that and get rid of it, if you don't get it all the way gone, you're going to just release and unleash a beast or a bombardment of those mycotoxins, and you might actually make yourself way sicker. So please don't go messing around with mold. Don't try to be a hero and clean it all up yourself. Let the professionals do that. Just get out of the house. Again, these are defense chemicals. If mold colonies like to exist by themselves, they don't like competition for their organic materials or their food supply. If two mold colonies start merging in on each other, they're going to start just unleashing this biochemical warfare with mycotoxins, trying to knock each other out. And you don't want to be caught in the middle of that warfare. Now, the other thing about mycotoxins that can make them pretty harmful is that they can actually seep through the building materials. So even if you can't see the mold, you could still be getting sick from the mold or from the mycotoxins, because they can come through walls, they can come through studs, tiles, things like that. So it's very important. That's why mold inspectors are super important, which we'll talk about soon, because they know when they walk into a house, where do I need to look to start diagnosing this home? They're kind of like a doctor for your house, and they can tell you where that mold may be coming from. So again, mycotoxins, defense chemicals, they colorless, odorless. Mycotoxins are also about 50 times smaller than spores. So when we talk about filtration units, a lot of filters can filter down to that small mycotoxin or to the small spore level, but they can't filter the mycotoxins out of the air, which can make it incredibly difficult to end up going back into a house even after remediation, because some of those mycotoxins could still be there. They can also penetrate much deeper into the lungs, causing a much broader array of symptoms than just mold spores. And we'll talk about what the differences between those two types of symptoms look like. Now, mold is not all bad. Mold is used medicinally. One of the most common antibiotics that we use to this day is penicillin. Penicillin was found by the penicillium mold. So that's actually a mold colony that, in the way that guy found penicillin, was he was trying to grow bacteria on a culture and he couldn't get the bacteria to culture. And it's actually because there was a presence of penicillin or penicillium in that mold species created a chemical that killed that bacteria. So now we actually have found a way to extract that and we use it as an antibiotic. Lovastatin, which is a cholesterol lowering medication, was developed and derived from Aspergillus mold species. One of the really common immunosuppressant medications that they'll use when they really need to knock someone's immune system down, in the case of severe autoimmunity or post-transplants, is they'll use mycophenolic acid, which literally is a mycotoxin that makes people very sick, that we actually test for on our mold test. You don't want to have mycophenolic acid show up on your mold test, and you certainly don't want to be doing something that's requiring you to take a prescription mycophenolic acid. It just makes no sense to suppress the body's immune system that much. They also use mold to activate certain supplements. So when we're looking at taking supplements, a lot of times people who have mold sickness are going to be really sensitive to supplements that are grown near funguses that are fungus themselves, that have been activated using funguses. So it's important to know how your supplement is produced also. Let's talk a little bit now about how mold affects us. So there's two main types of mold sickness that we're going to get. We have spore sickness, which is the traditional medical model of mold sickness. And we also have mycotoxin illness. So what's going to happen is those spores are going to get inhaled into your lungs, and you're going to end up with a localized allergic reaction. We'll talk about what the symptoms of that look like in a second, but that's going to be more of the asthma, allergies, that type of thing. Spores can also be broken into fragments. So we can have spore fragment inhalation. The spore fragments, as you can see, are able to get a lot deeper into the lungs. But what really causes a lot of problems systemically is mycotoxins, because those mycotoxins, again, are about 50 times smaller than a spore, and they're going to go deep within the lungs. And that's where that oxygen and blood barrier exchange is. And those mycotoxins can actually get pulled into the body, and they can be transported to different areas of the body where they just unleash havoc on us. So that's why mold symptoms a lot of times can be very difficult to detect, because they are so diffuse in so many different regions of the body. But having those multiple diffuse symptoms is a really good sign that there may be mold going on, just because there's not a lot of things that can create that global of a response like mycotoxins can. So spore sickness, this is the traditional view of mold sickness. If you went to your medical doctor and you said, I think I have a mold issue, they're going to typically run an IgE allergy panel. That's looking at your body's immune response to mold, and they're checking for, do you have an allergy, an IgE, anaphylactic type of a response to mold spores? This is one of the big reasons that mold is so underdiagnosed, because this is typically where we stop with our medical interpretation or diagnosis of mold. The symptoms, again, are going to be mostly allergy type symptoms, that chronic cough, congestion, eye irritation, difficulty breathing, throat irritation, that type of stuff. And typically this is going to be, we walk into a place that has mold spores in it, we get that reaction, we leave the building and we feel better. People who, if they have mold spores in their house, they go on a vacation and they stay in a hotel room that's clean and they feel way better. They come home, they feel worse again, or vice versa. People go on vacation, they stay in and whoever's old house that was built in the 1920s, and it's got a bunch of mold and they feel terrible while they're there. As soon as they leave, they feel better because the spores are gone. They're not continuing to inhale those spores. Mycotoxin illnesses, symptoms. Again, this is going to be what's oftentimes misdiagnosed, and it can go misdiagnosed for a very long time, again, because it can show up as so many different things. Those mycotoxins infiltrate deep within the body, and the symptoms, again, multiple unrelated different organ systems. That's when we can start to think about mold, because, again, it penetrates so deeply. So if we talk about what mold sickness is, we've got our spore symptoms plus our mycotoxin symptoms. That's going to be kind of that umbrella of mold sickness. So when we're talking about mold sickness in the office, when we're testing, we can test for all of these different things to really put the pieces of the puzzle together to figure out what's going on. So sounds like maybe mold's going to be your problem. Let's talk about how we can start to understand and diagnose what's going on within your body, and really hammer down whether or not mold is actually the problem for you. So mold sickness, we can do a couple different things. So we can do a symptoms checklist. We can look and say, having a conversation on initial appointment, we can figure out, these symptoms seem like they're this, they seem like they're this, or they seem like they're all over the place. And, we really are suspecting mold. So that's kind of our first clue, is that we've got a lot of these symptoms going on. The next slide, we're going to talk about some telltale signs that you're dealing with mold. And typically those are going to be kind of dead giveaways that there's a mold issue going on. We can also do laboratory testing. So we can look at IgE reactions, again, that spore sickness. We can actually run mycotoxins and see if you have absorbed mycotoxins in your body. And then we can do environmental testing, because once we figure out that your body is infected with mold, well, now we have to figure out where it came from. And if we can't get you out of the source, how are we ever going to help get you better? Now, we can get you feeling better, but it's going to be difficult to get you all the way there if we can't get you out of that environment. So let's look at some of those common mold sickness symptoms. So we've got blurry vision, ice pick-like sensation, or shooting like lightning bolt sensations. These are going to be really common neurological symptoms that come along with mold. The other one is people who get static electricity a lot or get shocked all the time. They touch a doornail and a door handle, and they've got that static like sensation. That's a big indicator that there may be mold going on. Ringing and itchiness in the ears, vertigo, that type of stuff, POTS, brain fog, dementia, severe allergies. When we say severe allergies, we're talking about someone who's allergic to everything, not necessarily someone who springtime rolls around and they've got those springtime allergies. This is someone who is allergic to everything under the sun. A lot of people call this mast cell activation syndrome. So that's a big thing with mold. If they're peeing all the time, that frequent urination, the body's constantly trying to flush those mycotoxins out. People who are really sensitive, I see this all the time, people who are sensitive to medications, supplements, EMFs, you name it. These are going to be the people who they're the first person to get sick. And in the book, Breaking the Mold by Dr. Jill Krista, she talks about this and calls these people canaries. If you've heard of the canary in the coal mine, the coal miners couldn't smell the toxic fumes that were being released. And so they would send canaries in there. The canaries were the first ones to get sick. If the canary died, you knew you needed to get out. Well, now some people are kind of like the canaries. They're the first ones that get sick. They're the most sensitive to all these things. And everybody just writes them off like they're crazy, but it could be mold sickness that's going on. And figuring that out can help you feel significantly better. A lot of neurological issues as well. A lot of times Alzheimer's can be attributed to mold. So they have what's called now inhalation Alzheimer's, which is basically Alzheimer's that's derived from inhaled toxins. And then people who constantly just have that metallic taste in their mouth. Now, this is not an all-encompassing list. What I wanted to do was put together a list of things where if you have these specific things, there's a high chance that that alone is mold. However, as you can see, mold can cause issues in almost every single system. And we'd be here all night if we were talking about all the different issues that we could get from mold. But EENT, it's eyes, ears, nose, throat, very common because it's an inhaled issue. Respiratory issues, digestive issues, circulatory issues, skin issues, brain issues, nervous system issues, urinary tract issues, immune system issues, reproductive issues. So mold can be endless, the symptoms. So Break the Mold, this book right here is absolutely awesome. Dr. Jill Krista does a great job of walking through a lot of this stuff. And she dives into some of these symptoms. So if you are interested in learning more about that, this is a great resource and a great book for you. So say you've read the symptoms and it sounds like this may be something that you've got going on. So what's next? Do we want to just dive into really expensive testing? Do we want to go ahead and start with something that can kind of confirm our suspicions? And the great thing with mold is that we don't have to dive down that rabbit hole of really expensive testing to get started with. And it's not even that the testing's that expensive, but there's cheaper options that we can start with that are going to confirm our suspicions. And that's called a visual contrast sensitivity test. So one of the big things that mold affects is the nerves. And when we have things that affect nerves, they tend to affect the smaller nerves first. So think the small nerves in the back of the eye. So vision is really heavily affected by mold. And one thing it's going to do is get rid of or diminish your ability to tell contrast. So that's what this visual contrast sensitivity test is doing. This is a test that you can get for $15. If you want to get it and you want us to be able to see the results, when you go on there and sign up for an account, just put my name, Dr. Connor Wolf, in there. I'll pop up in that referral provider. That's just going to make sure that I have access to that test results. And anytime we send you test results in the future to track our progress, I'll get access to all of that. So if you do want to do that test and you want me to be able to see it, just go ahead and put my name in there in the referral box. The test only costs $15. You can actually take the test for free. It will show you the initial report here, this result overall. So this is my test that I actually just did yesterday. It said positive. If it says negative, you don't even need to pay the $15 unless you want to see kind of the breakdown of the results. But if it says positive, then, pay the $15, get the rest of the testing, and then that will automatically get uploaded to me as well. But basically what this does, it takes you through a bunch of different plates. It's super simple. You just say, are the lines going up, sideways, or not at all? And then it knows kind of if you're right or wrong. The lines are bigger, closer together, difference in contrast. So you can see this is my test result. And then based on these different groupings, it can pick up whether it thinks that it's an issue with biotoxins, so like mycotoxins, or if we have maybe an issue with nutrition or other things that are going on. Obviously, if you have cataracts, glaucoma, macular degeneration, vision issues, this is not going to be a great test for you. But if you have normal vision, if you wear contacts, that's fine. You can do it with corrected vision. But it's, again, very easy test results. So again, this is my test result. You can see overall positive. Biotoxins I was positive for. So there's a high suspicion that I may have mold in my system based on my results. Nutritional deficiency, also positive. Not that surprising since I do a lot of running and stuff outside and I'm constantly sweating and wearing my body down. And then it also has a 51 questionnaire at the bottom and says, do you have these symptoms? And you just say yes, 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 no, no, no. If you say yes, it'll ask you a couple follow-up questions just to kind of pinpoint whether that's completely unrelated or potentially related to mold. And then based on that, so I have persistent fatigue, headaches, thirst, teary and watery eyes, red eyes, things like that. So, based on my symptoms, it wasn't really suspicious of mold, but based on my contrast test, it was suspicious of mold. So I am going to be running a mold test here on myself so I can see what's going on. So that's a really great first line of defense. Now, say you're the type of person who responds to everything, because we talked about how mold will cause you to respond to a bunch of stuff. You'll have allergies to everything. You'll be very sensitive. So that's kind of what we look for here with this IgE testing. Now, we run IgG, food allergy testing, on a lot of our patients. I was looking at delayed food responses. We test 8 of the most common IgEs, which are those immediate anaphylactic responses. And a lot of times when patients come back with 4, 5, 6 of the 8 we test, that's a pretty good indicator something else is going on under the surface, mold, parasites, things like that. And so we want to run an expanded panel. So this is a patient that we ran an expanded panel on. As you can see, of the foods that we tested, they showed up for almost every single one of them. So we have severe, severe activation of the immune system. And they also showed up for all the molds. And so what that means is we've got IgE, histamine responses, anaphylactic type responses to mold spores. So this is a perfect example of a case where this person has spore sickness. Now, if they're not around the mold spores, they're fine, right? Because nothing's activating the immune system. But if they are around the spores, if they've inhaled those spores deep into their lungs, now we're going to start to have issues because their immune system's reacting abnormally. Where I may walk into that room and feel fine, they're going to walk into that room and immediately feel terrible because their immune system is responding like this. So this is more testing for spore sickness. Let's go ahead and look at mycotoxin sickness. So we talked about how mold spores, when they're disturbed, they can release mycotoxins. Sorry, the mold spores don't release mycotoxins. The mold itself releases mycotoxins, right? And so this is a test that we run all the time. This is a urine test. This is going to be a blood test. This is testing in urine. This is looking at clearance of mycotoxins. This is a person who found mold in his washer dryer unit, got really sick from it. He ended up moving back home. He felt a lot better when he moved home, went back to Miami, felt terrible again. Telltale sign there's a mold issue going on. In his case, he actually found the mold, so he knows he has a mold issue. But we tested it to get an understanding of which mycotoxin we were dealing with. In his case, it was ochratoxin A. For the purposes of time tonight and the fact that I don't want to put all you guys to sleep, we're not going to go into each one of these mycotoxins. But different ones are going to come from different mold colonies. They can mean different things. They can have different symptoms and affect different areas. And each one of them, depending on what's going on, we have to treat slightly different. And this is why this test is really good. It's one thing to say, we're suffering from a mold issue. It's another thing to say, this is the specific mycotoxin that my body's dealing with. And these are the steps that I need to take based on this mycotoxin to clear it out. So looking at mold and mycotoxins is really important as well. Now, one of the other things I did not put up here is you can run a mycotoxin test and also look at heavy metals at the same time. That's what I'm going to be doing on myself. And the really cool thing about that is that mold forms what are called biofilms. So yeast is going to do the same thing. It creates a biofilm. It's like a protective coat of armor. It makes it very difficult for us to get rid of the mold when it's in our body and clear it out. And the heavy metals are a big thing that kind of builds into that biofilm. So if we do a mycotoxin test, we come back with mycotoxins positive. We also come back with a ton of heavy metals. We know we're going to be fighting an uphill battle trying to get rid of all of that. And it's just going to be a little bit more difficult, but it's important to know because then there's, again, other things that we can do to help get rid of the heavy metals. So knowing is really important. Now, we talked about all these different symptoms and systems that can be affected by mold. So it's important to also check those systems because we want to see what's going on, what the result is. And this is a patient who we're running a mycotoxin panel on right now. He's got a really, really depleted immune system. His absolute CD3 cells, which should be close to 15 to 1800, they're at 600. His CD4 cells, which should be close to 6 to 800, those are 360. So very low. So his immune system's completely suppressed because of, I can't tell you it's mold specifically, but I'm suspecting that this is a mold related issue. Now, the other thing that mold can do that's unique to anything else is it can deactivate natural killer cells. So all the way at the bottom here, we've got this CD1656 natural killer cells. You can see that his are at 207. 207 is a great number. This test specifically doesn't give activated or functional natural killer cells. However, that's something that we could potentially run in the future, but we don't really need to if we know that it's a mold related issue, but you can run a functional natural killer cell test. And mold, again, is one of the few things that will show high natural killer cells that just aren't functioning properly because mold has basically deactivated them. Now, mold can suppress the immune system, which means that we can also get a lot of co-infections that go along with that. One of the big ones is yeast because, again, mold and yeast and mushrooms are all in that fungi family, so they can kind of feed into each other. Candida albicans here is going to be one of the most common that goes along with that. I'm realizing now as I do the test that right in the middle, which should be on its own slide, is parasites. So this patient right here, the bottom one, the line that goes all the way across, that patient has Candida albicans or a yeast overgrowth in their gut. The patient on top right here, they have a parasite issue going on. So again, a co-infection. You can also have a significant number of bacterial infections. So these are all visualized through a stool test. Here's a blown up version of that parasite test. Yeast overgrowth, bacterial infections, parasitic infections, when we have a lot of that going on, it's an indicator that there's something else that's suppressing that immune response, and mold oftentimes is to blame for that. Now, parasites is another thing that can cause significant hyperactivity within that immune response, causing the mast cell activation. But again, talking about mold, there's a lot of things that can be going on. So don't just jump to the conclusion that mold is your problem because you have some symptoms. That's why having a conversation with a doctor and getting tested to see specifically what's going on in your case is super, super important. And I see a comment there. Washing machine could be the cause. Absolutely. That little seal. If you have a top loading washing machine, it's not going to be as big of a deal. The front loading washing machines. The patient I was talking about a second ago, his issue was the mold. It was actually growing in the seal inside that washing machine. And because it's kind of folded over, it's really difficult to get all the moisture out of there. And one of the reasons my wife and I, when we bought a washing machine for our house, we paid the couple $100 extra to get the fancy washing machine that's a front loader, but that has a drying cycle on it, so that mold gets, or the air gets vented out, so we don't have to worry about mold growth in there. So something to look into if you are going to replace your washing machine, or if it's time to buy a new one, get one that has a ventilation feature on it. So all right, how about indoor mold testing? So we've tested our body, we found out we've had mold. Now we've got to figure out where it's coming from. Number one thing I have to kind of address here is just because you don't visually see mold does not mean there is not a mold issue going on in your house. Again, this is why hiring an inspector who knows what to look for in a house is super important. But the mold could easily be forming behind the wall, leaking pipes in the walls, things like that. Our houses, again, are built to be breeding grounds for mold now. So checking behind the walls, underneath of the carpet, things like that, super important. And it could be the mycotoxins that are seeping through that are making you super sick. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And if you see it, don't say, oh, this is my problem. Wipe with bleach, problem solved. You're just going to spread all those mycotoxins even more. And you could just wipe it around, or you could be moving one mold colony, which allows another mold colony to come in. So you've got to be very, very careful when you're getting rid of mold. So when it comes to a mold inspector, there's a couple different companies that accredit or certify mold inspection. The BBEC, the Building Biology Environmental Consultant, the ACAC, American Council for Accredited Certification, and the IICRC, Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification. Now, the IICRC has mold inspection and mold remediation. It's very important that you don't use the same company for both. And anybody who is certified and I say fiduciary, just because the term means you care more about the other person than yourself, you should never have the same person inspecting and testing that is doing the remediation. There's just a conflict of interest there, and you don't want to be doing that. So have two separate people do it. When you're looking for an inspector, these are some great resources. Now, we do have a mold guide. The mold guide I'll have a QR code to the link for the mold guide, so you guys can download that. The mold guide will be updated within the next couple of days. So go on there. You can download that mold guide now, but go back and check in a couple days because I'm going to update it with a couple more things. I'm going to put these updates on there. So just come back, check it again. It's going to be, there's a link on our website. So I have the QR code and I can just tell you guys what the link is. So you guys who are watching right now can write that down. So there's a couple different types of popular mold testing. There's the classic DIY, do-it-yourself at-home test, which is an ambient air test. This is going to be the cheapest option. It's the cheapest for a reason because it doesn't work very well. The reason for that is it's only going to test what's circulating in the air. We're just capturing different airs or air in different rooms and hoping that there's mold spores in there. Now, mold spores aren't just indefinitely floating around in the air. If they're not being disturbed, if the mold spores are behind a wall, it's a really high chance that you're not going to collect it. The other thing to know is that when you have an ambient air test or an ERMI test, which we'll talk about next, they're culturing out those mold spores. About 90% of mold that's in your house doesn't grow on a culture medium like that. And you're also relying on visual inspection from an examiner. So you're only going to actually catch about 10% of the mold if it does happen to be circulating in the air. An ambient air test is also only looking for mold spores. It's not looking for mycotoxins or endotoxins. Let's talk about the ERMI test. So this is going to be a step up because this is collecting the mold spores and DNA from the carpet. So it's looking for spores and it's looking for DNA. It's collecting them from carpet and other surfaces, which is going to be a much better option. So it's better than testing the ambient air, but it's still not as good as the next test, which is the dust test. The reason that this is so important is because this is testing dust particles. Again, dust particles are going to be really, really easy for mold spores to grow on. We're going to be able to test that from different areas, different rooms, all sorts of different surfaces. The cool thing about this one also is that they are going to, now, if you upgrade and get the more expensive test, they will test for mycotoxins and endotoxins. If you think you're suffering from a mold-related illness, it's worth spending the extra money to test for mycotoxins and endotoxins. Endotoxins are going to be bacterial in nature, so not directly mold-related, but a similar concept is mycotoxins. Some of those bacteria can release those toxin compounds into the air. So we went through the symptoms checklist. We think we have mold. We did the VCS test. We found out that our symptoms are correlating and our score is correlating and saying there's a good chance that we have mold. We did some laboratory tests. We found out that our body, we do have mold, either IgEs to spores, or we have the mycotoxins in our body. We tested our house. Now we found out that we have mold in our house. So what's next? How do we get rid of it? Well, number one is we've got to avoid it. So we've got a 5-step approach here. I'm not sure why that's doing that. That's not right. All right. So the 5-step approach here. Again, this approach, I did not come up with this. This is in the book from Dr. Joe Krista. Again, if you want to learn a lot more about that, that book is a great resource. It's very patient focused. It's very easy to understand for a patient. It's not going to give you access to all the fine little details that you may need if you're dealing with a big time mold exposure, but it gives you a lot of breadcrumbs and it leads you in the right direction. It gives you a lot of things that you can actually start doing at home right away. But I would not recommend trying to tackle mold on yourself or by yourself, because we can get a whole host of issues that arise if we're starting to do things too fast or the wrong way. But number one, first step is avoidance. And she calls this kind of like peeling the layers of an orange. Around the outside, that outside layer of the orange is the avoidance. We've got to get away from the mold source. This means that when your house is getting remediated, go somewhere else and don't take anything with you, because those mold spores, they get everywhere. And if you've got mold growing in your bathroom and your closet's right next to it and the doors are open all the time and you're going in and out and in and out, there's a really good chance that you brought those mold spores with you. If you inhaled them, you're going to breathe them out again. And if you inhaled mold spores in your bathroom, you walked into your closet, you exhaled, now we've got mold spores that are contaminating all of our clothes. And if we bring those clothes with us, now we're taking all those mold spores from the dirty environment into the clean environment. And guess what's going to happen to our clean environment? It's not going to be clean anymore. So this is a really important piece, is that we've got to avoid it. Now, in some cases, we just can't avoid it, or we can't avoid it right now. It takes time to start avoiding it, so we can start working on other things first. But it's going to come back to, we are not going to continue progressing if we can't continue to avoid where that mold's coming from. So with avoidance, there's a couple different things that we can do. So we have to avoid our habitat. That's our home, the place where we're physically being exposed to mold, whether it's our house, our vehicle, our workplace. We got to find out where that is. If we can't get away from it, we've got to try to protect it. So that's where we've got some short-term solutions. We can use a couple different types of air filters or air purifiers. The one on the left there, the Air Doctor. The Air Doctor has an ultra HEPA filtration system. It can filter down to 0.003 microns. So a spore is 0.1 microns. So you've got to make sure that the filter that you've got is able to filter down to at least 0.1. These Air Doctors are a really great option. They also filter the air fast enough that it's going to have an effect on the room or the house. If you've got a 2,000 square foot house and a filter that only filters air 2 times an hour in a 500 square foot room, it's going to do literally nothing to the air. Now, even 0.003, now Air Doctor's website says they can filter out mycotoxins. Whether or not they can successfully filter out enough mycotoxins to prevent someone who's sick from continuing to be sick, I don't know. They're probably not able to keep up with mold spores, though, because the mold spores are going to be putting out millions and millions of mycotoxins per square inch. It's very hard for me to believe that the Air Doctor is going to be able to keep up with that, because that requires active filtration. It has to be pulled through the Air Doctor. The other type over here, the Valera Air Surface Pro, those are awesome because those are air ionizers. And what those do is they send ionized particles out into the environment that neutralize mold spores, mold toxins. These can actually kill mold. Now, they can kill some mold. They're not going to kill all the mold. And putting one of those in your house that's full of mold is not going to remediate it. But if you know you have mold in your bedroom and you sleep in your bedroom every night and you can't leave, that's going to be a much better option. So it's kind of getting us there, but it's not getting us all the way there. So habitat, getting as much fresh air as you can, using a good filter is really important. Now, if we're trying to get rid of mold from our body, we've also got to make sure that our food and our beverages and our supplements are not also full of mold. So if we're trying to get rid of mold, we know that mold's in the fungus family, and yeast and mushrooms are also in the fungus family. We probably shouldn't be eating things with yeast in them, like bread, like kombuchas, like vinegar. So there's all sorts of things with yeast, beer, wine. We've got to avoid those. We also want to avoid a lot of sugar, because sugar is going to feed all of that mold. It's going to feed the yeast. Sweetened beverages, fermented teas. Coffee is a really big one because coffee has a lot of mold on it. Peanuts have a lot of mold on it. So you want to get a certified mycotoxin-free coffee. The brand that we recommend and sell in the office and personally drink at home is Bulletproof Coffee. Bulletproof is third-party tested, certified mycotoxin-free. So very, very important that we're not consuming things that are still filling us with more mold. And then the last one is our habits or our hobbies. If you go to work and you're working as a brewmaster and you're constantly around fermenting grains, we've got to stop doing that for a little bit so we can get ourselves better. And then you can reintroduce those things, but we've got to get away from the source and give our body a complete break from it so that we can start to heal properly again. Now, let's look at long term. Long term, there's only one do. Long term, remediate your house. You've got to remediate your house, and you've got to find a reputable source to do that. If you're in the Sarasota area, the people that we recommend are Dry Medic. They do an awesome job. You're not going to like your mold remediator because they're going to come into your house and they're going to tell you everything that has to go. And you may think, oh, I've just got this one little square of mold that's hiding behind my kitchen cabinets. Just take that piece of drywall out and get rid of it. And unfortunately, it's not the way it works. You have to take everything out. You've got to take out way larger of a piece than you think. If you've got 2 feet of mold, you're going to have to take out at least 6 feet because you've got to go 2 feet on each side. We've got to really do the job. And a lot of times what happens is we do the remediation, we have to retest. And if you're taking out building materials like the studs behind your walls, retest before they close the wall back up, because what you don't want to do is have them not get rid of everything and then close it up and have the mold grow back again. So it's worth the money to spend to retest. And anybody who's worth their salt at remediation should not care that you're retesting before they close up. They should retest themselves, but hire a third-party independent tester to come in. The don'ts. Don't just use an air purifier and call it a day. Don't try to do it yourself. Don't pour bleach on the mold, and don't ignore it because you can't see it, and don't look at it and still ignore it. Just don't do that. Shouldn't have to explain that, but just get it remediated properly. It's not going to be a cheap process, but you've just got to do it, or you've just got to leave. And it's a tricky situation to get in because if you get your home inspected and you find mold, now you've got a liability and you have to remediate. So this is always a careful conversation that we have to have with people, is that if we're going to go down this mold pathway, number one, if it's the problem, that's what we have to do. But just understand that going down that pathway is going to open up a lot of different things that we have to start doing. And if you find out that you have mold in your house, you can't sell it till you remediate it, or you have to disclose it. So just understand that there could be a liability that's created as part of this. Don't get mad at me. Don't say I didn't tell you. Just understand that that's part of the process. Now, fundamentals. So we've gotten out of the system. Now we've got to get our system back to the point where we can start to address the mold. If you think, oh, I've got mold, I'm going to take a bunch of mold killers and detox agents, you're going to be in a world of hurt if you don't get the fundamentals taken care of first. So what are the fundamentals? Circadian rhythm, improve waste elimination, focus on health basics. Again, not my information. The book is awesome. And it's all very well elaborated in there. These are things that you can start doing before you come see a doctor or a mold expert. Start doing some of this stuff at home, because if you come see me, I'm going to tell you got to get away from it, and I'm going to tell you you've got to get the basics in order. So if you can start doing some of this stuff now, it's going to save you a lot of time by the time you come see a mold expert who can help you kind of take it home. And this is where I'm going to spend the most time during the talk, is what you guys can start doing now, because the other steps are a lot more complicated and they're way more specific to what you have going on. And it gets into it in this book. It gets into it in the book called Toxic. But again, until you get the testing done, you don't even know like what you need to be doing. So don't try to do this all yourself. Make sure that you're partnering with someone who can walk alongside you. Make sure that you're being monitored. Make sure that you're doing the right stuff. So circadian rhythm. This is our natural sleep-wake cycle. If you're familiar with the circadian rhythm at all, you know this is what gets us up in the morning. It's what takes us down at night. So one thing that we have to do is protect our sleep at all costs. Now, I've got another video I did that I can link in the description if you're watching this later on YouTube. If you're not watching it later and you're watching it right now, thank you for watching it live. Go to YouTube, find my YouTube channel, Dr. Connor Wolf, search for the Cortisol Crash Course. And I talk about all sorts of strategies that you can do to protect your sleep. Sleep is the most important thing. It's when our body heals. If we don't sleep, we can't heal. So protect our sleep at all costs. Some quick, easy things that you can do that. Morning and evening walks. Getting exposure to the first 45 minutes of light and the last 45 minutes of light. I'll go into all that in that other talk, Cortisol Crash Course. You can find that on YouTube. Create a schedule when things are done to get them done at the exact same time. May seem monotonous, but if you can get your body programmed This is what I do when I wake up. This is what I do right after. This is what I do after that. Then your body's going to start getting trained to know when it's getting up and when it's going to bed. The biggest one is protecting that bedtime, that last hour. It's don't go into the bedroom and turn the TV on, because now every time I go into the bedroom to go to sleep, my brain is getting excited because it thinks TV is coming. Go into the bedroom and read a book and turn the lights down low and only have red lights in your bedroom, because now every time I walk in there, my brain thinks this is my sanctuary. I'm getting ready to wind down and go to sleep. That's why it's so important to make sure that you're doing the right things in that last hour and protecting your sleep. Improve elimination. Mold mycotoxins are in our body. How do we get rid of them? We have to work on our emunctories, which are elimination pathways. And for us, that is through fecal matter or pooping, it's peeing, or through urine, and it's sweating through our skin. There's other ways that we can eliminate things, but we don't need to go vomit and things like that, right? So how do we improve elimination? One of the main ones being going to the bathroom. Number 2, pooping, right? Big thing, reduce stress. If we're stressed and our body's in fight or flight, it doesn't care about digestion. It doesn't care about moving things through the digestive tract. If we're struggling with constipation, one of the first things that we work on with our patients is reducing stress. Getting adjusted, super important for reducing stress. All the nerves that control our digestive area come out of our back. If there's issues with our spine and our back that puts stress on the nerves, those nerves don't function properly. It can also cause us to be in that sympathetic state. So getting adjusted can relax us. If you've been adjusted, you know you feel a lot more relaxed afterwards. All of that helps calm down that stress response. One of the other things I was reading about that I thought was kind of funny is schedule a time to go to the bathroom. If you're doing it in a hurry, you might give up too soon. So again, it sounds kind of funny, but every single morning, schedule it 10 minutes. I have 10 minutes where I'm going to sit here and try to go to the bathroom as much as I can. Again, it sounds kind of goofy, but just do it. Schedule it. Give yourself time to go to the bathroom, because you have to get things moving through. Drinking plenty of clean water. That's going to help get us urinating more, washing all of that out. It's like washing our body from the inside. Infrared sauna helps to make us sweat. And then do something that makes you sweat every single day. Go for a walk outside in the sun, sit in the infrared sauna, do jumping jacks for 10 minutes. Do something that just gets things moving through your body. Focus on health basics. So breath work, drinking clean water, eating good, healthy foods, getting regular movement in, cold plunging, infrared sauna, contrast therapy. One of the big things here is we've got to move things in and out of our body. If we've got lung or mold spores in our lungs, go get fresh air away from mold spores. Don't do this in your mold infected house. Go out, get fresh air. Breathe in, breathe out, move air through your lungs, breathe deep into your lungs, and exhale all of those spores out. Drink clean water, water in, water out, moving water throughout your body, washing those toxins away, getting water and getting blood flow and circulation into different areas with exercise, with sauna, with cold plunging. Move that blood flow through your body. If we can force blood into areas and then force it out, it's going to bring nutrients in. It's going to pick up toxins and chemicals and take them out. So now we can eliminate them. So we've got to get things moving through our body. And then eat the color of the rainbow. A lot of the colors in vegetables and fruits, there's a lot of bioflavonoids in there, a lot of antioxidants. It's very important for helping to protect the body and detox it and clean these things out. So focus on the simple things that make people healthy. All right. Next thing is protect. So this is kind of where it gets a little bit tricky, because it depends on what's going on. This is where we're going to start to need a little bit more support from a healthcare provider who's a little bit mold literate, because we're going to need to recognize the symptoms. If you're someone that's coming in with severe dementia, Alzheimer's, brain fog, issues like that because of mold, the treatment that you need is going to be significantly different than someone who's coming in with blurry vision and ringing in the ears and electric shock like symptoms, right? So what to do for these different things? Yeah, some of it's the same. There's a similar philosophy, but depending on the mycotoxins that are present, depending on the mold that's present, we need to use different binders, different bowel movers, different detox agents. It starts with protecting the areas that are hit the hardest to try to protect and restore and regenerate and heal those areas. And again, it depends on the type and method of mold exposure. In the book, Dr. Jill uses a really good example of a hockey player who just threw his gross wet pads in the bag every night and then just sat there and got all gross and crusty and could literally see mold on them. And he was so sick during hockey season because every day he put the moldy pads on his bare skin and he started sweating, his pores opened up, and they just sucked all that mold straight in. In his case, he had to do something that was really heavily focused on opening the pores and detoxing through the skin. Different than someone who's living in a moldy house, constantly breathing in mycotoxins, who's got more respiratory issues, right? So you can see how these different methods of mold exposure we're going to have to treat and deal with different. The biggest things, though, the biggest themes, regardless of what we're using to do it, is we've got to get binders in there. So we've got to bind that mold and help carry it out of the body. Get bile movers. So the liver detoxes things, excretes it as bile into the gallbladder through the gut. We could talk all about the gallbladder, but we've got to get bile movers in there that are pulling that bile out, excreting it into the digestive system so we can eliminate it. We got to have detoxing agents that are going to help support the liver's function, help support the kidneys' function. The bioflavonoids, all those really helpful antioxidants from foods. And then inflammation support, all very important. And again, we can target this based on the type of mold, the method of exposure, in the areas of your body that are hit the hardest. Then we've got to start repairing. Again, this repair process really depends on what was affected, but we start again with the systems that were most heavily affected. Things to look at to help with that repair: lymphatic massage, contrast therapy. So this is going to be going from heat to cold. We go into somewhere that's really hot, all that blood flow is going to go to our surface to keep us cool. We go into somewhere that's cold right after, it's all going to suck into our body to keep us warm. And that expansion, blood to the surface, blood to the core, that movement of blood is going to help pull nutrients to the tissues and help to pull toxins out of the body, into the liver, through the gut, through the kidneys, and out of our body. And then antioxidant support. These are things that a lot of people can start. Just be aware that sometimes some of these can create reactions as we start mobilizing those toxins. If we haven't built the fundamentals, don't try to mobilize toxins through your body if we can't get rid of them. But bioflavonoids from the food we're eating, resveratrol, glutathione, ALA, which is alpha linoleic acid, melatonin, coenzyme Q10, all very, very powerful antioxidants. And then once we've gotten all of that taken care of, then we can get to the point where we start fighting the mold. You notice we talked about all of these things and none of them were killing mold. There's a lot of things that are really good at killing mold, but if I start killing it, what happens? If you poke the bear, it's going to unleash holy hell on you, right? So we're going to start releasing all these things into our body when we start killing mold. We call them die-off symptoms for short. That's called a Herxheimer reaction. We want to be really careful with that. We have to make sure that your body is able to handle that before we start killing. And then once we start killing with antifungals, there's a ton of different herbs. I didn't put any of the herbs on there because I don't want you guys to run to the store and start grabbing all these different things, because it depends on the type of mold. And I don't want you going to grab something that's going to start clearing mold out of your body that's going to end up creating a worse issue. Because sometimes people can be very, very sensitive to this. And sometimes people can get really, really sick and end up being worse and taking a longer time to recover because they made themselves so sick trying to clear the mold out. So we have to sometimes move very slowly with that. When we're doing antifungals and killing the mold, we work at whole body antifungals and nasal antifungals. So a lot of this is inhaled. We're going to have heavy mold concentrations in our nasal passages. So we want to use separate nasal killers than we are using whole body killers. And there's a lot of different methods of inhalation of these things, but don't start doing that until you have whole body killers on board, and don't start doing that until the first 5 steps are addressed properly. And that's where one of us at the office can help to walk you through what that process looks like and give you the okay to move to the next step and be very specific with what's going on in your case, because this does take time. So end of the border, or moral of the story is, mold is a very, very big issue for a lot of people, especially down here in Florida. And it's so underdiagnosed that so many people have been dealing with these chronic health challenges that are a result of mold. A lot of people I talk to that are dealing with mold are so frustrated because they've gone to so many doctors, they've spent so much money trying to figure out what's going on. Some things helped for a little bit, then they stopped, or things got worse, or they never did anything. And it's because the underlying stress on the body was the mold. When you come into the office, what we're looking for is we believe that God designed your body to function normally, and all it does is adapt and respond to the environment that you put it in. If the environment you put your body in is full of mold and mycotoxins, how can we possibly expect it to respond and adapt in a way that's favorable to our overall health? We can't. But if mold is not the stressor or the adaptation that your body's dealing with, fighting mold is not going to be the answer. So the first thing is we've got to figure out, is mold your problem? If mold is your problem and you've been fighting all of these other things and nothing's gotten better, it's because we never took the body out of the environment and it keeps responding to the same things. We have to get to the bottom of it. For some patients, it's bacterial infections. For some patients, it's chronic viral infections. For some patients, it's mold. And a lot of those symptoms show up similarly. And that's why sitting down and having a longer conversation with someone who knows about all these different areas, we can help guide you in the right direction so we're not wasting a ton of time and a ton of money. But unfortunately, sometimes it does take time to figure out what's going on specifically. We can try the best we can to figure it out, but at the end of the day, we're guessing to an extent. We want to just make it as educated of a guess as possible so we can get to the bottom of it as quickly as possible. In the end of the day, your body was designed to function normally. When we remove the stress, it can get back to that point. We've just got to remove the stress, and we've got to give your body what it needs to start to heal and function normally again. So if you feel like you might be dealing with mold symptoms, if this sounds like you, then reach out. We can help start some of this stuff. There's no problem with starting some of the foundational stuff now. If you get to the point where you're doing some of it and you feel like you're ready for the next step, reach out, let us know. We can help guide you along that process. In the meantime, stay connected with us. As I mentioned, I do have a YouTube channel. This video will be on YouTube. You may be watching from YouTube, in which case check the comments because we'll have that mold guide link down there. Follow us on our social media pages. Follow us on the Lakewood Ranch Holistic Health Facebook page, the Clean and Green Living group. It's a hugely important toxin-free living group, all sorts of toxic-free stuff. The Wellness Way Lifestyle group, all of that right on here. And then get the mold guide right here. So I said I'd throw the QR code up there. If you cannot scan that because you're watching this from your phone, you can go to our website. It's www.tww, as in the Wellness Way, twwsarasota.com/mold-guide. So it's twwsarasota.com/mold-guide. You just put your name and email address in there. That'll throw you that PDF right away. And again, I will be updating that PDF in the next couple of days. So check back in a couple of days. Let us know what you think. And I appreciate you guys all for sticking around and watching. Hopefully you learned a little bit. Hopefully you've got some hope. This is stuff that we can deal with. Sometimes you just need a little bit of extra support and you need to know specifically what's going on because everybody that we see is not the same and everybody needs to be treated uniquely. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care, and we'll hope to talk to some of you guys soon in the office.